Hey everybody, welcome once again to Rise of the GM, where today we're going to be talking about Framed for Murder, an encounter. We're going to be talking about a board prankster, an NPC, and this week, magic items, no. Trade, politics, and economy here on Rise of the GM. Hey there, Adam. It is good to be back with you again here today. We got a little bit of a late start because both of us are dads. Both of us have kids in the other room because today the wives were doing other things and we are in charge. So hopefully you don't see us having to look off camera and go take care of anything. But if you do, that's all that's happening here in the lands of the GMs. Got the kids in there. We call them NPKs, not player kids. Anyway, we are going to be... yeah, I know, that's pretty bad. We are going to be hitting some stuff here. We're back in our world building series, and I looked up there at the top of our thing, and it said, main topic for this week, magic and items. And I'm like, magic and no. Economy, trade, and politics is what we're talking about this week, and it's going to be hopefully good and exciting. But as always, to start off, Adam is going to start by reading us an encounter prompt that you can possibly take and incorporate in your game. This week it is about deadly distractions.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, this is one of those I really like because it has a lot of pieces to it. I think you can do a lot with it.
Pieces and parts.
Deadly distractions. Upon hearing a town crier proclaim the murder of a prominent public official, the PCs begin to notice eyes turning accusingly towards them. At first, town folk just whisper about them, but then they notice that a group of mercenaries seems to be watching them closely. The situation rapidly deteriorates for the PCs when they hear another crier loudly declare that the witnesses saw people running from the scene of the murder, people who match the description of the PCs. One of the townspeople points to the PCs and screams, "Those are the guys!" The PCs are forced to act quickly and with discretion as the town crier's descriptions have stirred people up all over the town. It becomes obvious that the PCs that the criers are being overzealous in their duties. If questioned, a crier will reveal that he's being paid to sensationalize the story. They'll find, however, that none were bribed by the same person. The only commonality is the bar where the criers were approached. The bar is a known hideout for the real murderer, a member of the Assassin's Guild. The guild might have been hired by a long-term enemy of the PCs, or might just be using the PCs as a scapegoat to draw attention away from their crimes. More information regarding the murder and frame-up can be obtained in the bar's basement, where most of the dirty stuff like gambling, prostitution, backroom dealing goes down. Entry to the area can be accomplished in many ways. The group can talk their way in, they could sneak in, or they could force their way past the guards, who won't put up much of a fight. Once inside, the PCs see someone, the murderer, bolt through a passage in the back. The rest of the people in the room will attack. After the fight, the path will be clear for the PCs to pursue the culprit, who's running through the sewers to meet up with reinforcements. While chasing him through the sewers, they'll face many traps that are designed to slow them down. If the PCs don't catch up to him before he gets to his destination, they'll face a much larger force. If they do catch up to him and stop him, he will reveal the whole plan. Between the information discovered about the murder, the confession of one or more of the criers, the evidence gathered from the patrons of the bar's basement, and the possible confession of the murderer, the PCs can clear their name with the authorities. This is deadly distractions.
So my favorite part of this has to be the very beginning. The fact that the town criers are the ones that start this whole thing. I would immediately, okay, so yes, this is an encounter you're going to take and you're going to add all your little parts and your traps and your social skills, but I would start it as the GM, just having them going about their business. Maybe they're in there looking to buy, stuff while they're in town. And then just having like 3 different encounters with town criers just over there. Extra. There was a big murder. Some people died with their heads cut off and whatever. And then there's the first one, everybody just kind of looks and, people all stop in the street and keep going. But then the next one would be like, hear ye. The people who were responsible have a guy with shaggy red hair and a hook on one. I mean, if your guys have shaggy red hair and a hook on one. I'm just trying to think of something that would be like immediately you'd be like, oh no, this is us.
Oh,
then another guy comes in. Oh yeah, please listen. Everyone would sound different, but they would all sound the same. And then the last one would be like, extra. There's the guys who did it, and everybody just kind of go like that. So I love the idea that it's the town criers and that they're all kind of overzealous, like I said, because they've maybe been told that like if they're the ones that get the PCs attacked, then they'll get a bonus. And so they're all being a little bit more pointed and a little bigger each time one of them comes on.
I love that.
But anyway, I got distracted because my Facebook started going bling, 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 because Josh is on our whatever Facebook page, like posting a bunch of stuff. He's probably in here too, and he knows he's doing it. Anyway, so that was one part that's exciting to me. And then they go and they find out, okay, it's not these guys. They're all being hired at this one bar, so that's kind of cool. And then your people get this chance to do some skill checks and bluffs and whatever they're going to do in the bar. And then I think the second favorite part of this for me is once they go into this place, there's all these people attack them while the dude runs out. So there's a fight there, but then it's the traps, all these traps designed to slow you down. I would have fun like making all these traps as you're trying to get to this guy before he gets the reinforcements. So yeah, I think they give you, it's kind of long. And as a GM, I would say I would pick and choose the parts of this that really, as I, on first reading, what I did there, I'm like, oh, this part really sticks out to me, and this part really sticks out. The town criers and the traps. Those are going to be the two parts I focus on. But in the middle, I'll make some skill checks, maybe a fight in that room, and I'll decide how hard do I want that fight to be before everybody backs off, because it's not the biggest fight unless I need a fight. I don't have anything planned for tonight, and I'm like, man, I need to throw like 20 guys at these PCs just one at a time. But then, what those traps are going to be, that would be fun for me as well. And that's what I would do if I were a GM using this. What about you?
Yeah, first of all, I love the town crier voices. That's excellent. And I loved the direction you went with that. I like one thing that's not even encounter related, but I think in games, like the idea of the town crier, I think is a really cool one of those pieces that maybe we don't think about super often when people are walking around, but it's like, hey, that's like a really, interesting way to bring things into the game. It may be like current events or rumors or, those lore drips that happen. That's like, not like, oh, like this is ancient history that a town crier is doing, but just things that are happening. You can kind of make the game a little more
something's happening in town that is noteworthy. Yeah. And so obviously people are going to be out here telling people about it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of a cool thing. And I just like that they're making use of those. I do think it's a really fun one with both like them being mistaken, the investigation kind of stuff that happens, the chase scene. And then
you get the choice to decide, what was this guy doing this for? Was he doing it to cover really something else he's doing? Was he doing it because he hates you and then he can become a bigger enemy? Does he, what was the reason? Well, you get to make that up as the GM.
Yeah, I like that too. And that was one of my favorite parts of this encounter, or I didn't even look at this. I feel like this could be an entire one shot. If you're looking for like, man, I just needed like an adventure to do in a session or two, like you could make this happen.
That could turn into more, because if it was that this guy's trying to get back at you, well, you get to decide why. Why is he trying to get back at you? And what's the greater behind that? Is he going to end up being a big bad, or is he like just the first domino and he's trying to get back at you because there's more?
Yeah, right. Yeah. The motivations are cool with that. And I think that's where you get to bring in a lot of your like personal creativity into that situation. But going back to the traps for a second, I love this because I think there's a lot of times, and I think there's probably more than I realize, but I think there's a lot of times it's like, man, I really want to use a trap, but it makes no sense for there to be traps in this place. It's like, why is there a trap in
the hallway of the government building of documents? Everybody comes in here every day to get documents, but there's a trap, right?
Right. Yeah. There's some of those that you have to like not think about reality or whatever, or it just doesn't make sense. But this is cool, I think, because it would make sense that like these people need a way out. They need to be able to get out quickly, and they have these things set up where it's like, well, as I run here, I touch this brick, or I don't step on this, or I duck here because there's a sensor, but people are not going to know that running through, chasing after them. So
yeah,
I
how
like
fun
that.
can it be for that one guy you have who's like the quick to fight, just chases everybody down, never lets anybody leave. He's just running face first into like all these things, one after another. Yeah. Bam, boom, smack.
I feel like I don't remember who it was or what game, but I feel like I remember one time being in a situation where I think I was the GM, and it was one of those, it's like, here's a massive hallway just full of traps. And the way that people, I think, just got tired of like dealing with it. And so the barbarian basically just raged out and ran straight through all of them and just took it. And I'm like, I guess that's a way to do it. I mean, you burn some resources, but so I like that a lot. I like the trap tunnel, and I think it's like actually one that's like, this makes sense that this would be here. So that's like a really cool thing.
Yeah.
For me.
So looking for something to throw in for a one shot or more, or just an encounter, there's one that you could possibly use. So,
yeah.
Well, hey, we're back in world building today. Still in world building. We had a little break a couple weeks ago, but this day we're talking about economy, trades, and politics. What do we mean when we say economy, trades, and politics, and how that helps build the world?
Yeah. This is our actual last world building for now, like in this kind of
the last
series.
One ever.
We're never talking about world building again.
For now.
That we may come back and have some other ones or answer questions. But this one was actually, I had asked a while, like several months ago on our Instagram stories, like, hey, what are some things you'd be interested in hearing about? And this was one of those that came from that.
Okay.
This was requested. And I got to say, probably wouldn't have been on my initial list if I was just doing it solely from the things I was thinking about, being on there. But I do think it's interesting. And for me, when I start thinking about economy, trade, politics, there's like kind of two pieces I'm holding with that when it comes to like building a world. One of them is that like greater kind of populating the world, making it more real, giving it more detail kind of situation, where that is like the background of the world for me, of this stuff's happening. And I kind of have a sense of how people maybe eat, or like trade routes, or like those kind of things that they're doing. This is a farming culture, or this is a fishing culture, or, there's industry happening here. But that's usually like more background for me in a lot of ways when I'm thinking about that in the worlds I make. And that's a really like passive kind of thing that's going on with those ideas. But the other piece is always like, how does this push the story forward? Like with these things, how do they actually, advance, or at least like enrich the story? And that's kind of the one I hold probably the most closely in these things. Like I like to populate the world. I like to detail it out, but I'm usually thinking more in terms of like, okay, there's a story being told. What does the trade of this place matter to that, if I'm going to get into those kind of weeds? And that's a lot more active kind of piece of that. So I think it's worth like kind of talking through here for us. Maybe there's some new GMs out there trying to figure out like, what do I even do with this? Maybe talking a little bit about how we've done that, how it's shown up in our games, and kind of see where that goes from there. So when you're thinking about those words, economy, trade, politics, like how does that play usually when you're thinking about your games?
Yeah. So for me, again, as a GM, the more you kind of have in your backstory, the more real things seem. You can get away with having none of that. And it'll just feel like, okay, this is what's in front of us today. This is what's in front of us today. Right. Almost can become like episodic. It's like, okay, here's what's happening. Yeah. But the more you have in mind, like some part of this, the more that it feels like there is a continuity to the world, and that you're moving through something that exists instead of just like it exists only as you step into it. Right. Now, having said that, the three of these words hit me as a GM, and this is going to be different for every GM. You have to decide when you're being the GM where your focus is on these and why.
Yeah.
Okay, and some of it will have to do with the way your game goes. But for me, typically, it goes like this. Politics is almost always part of it for me. So whether that's the politics of a small town, you got the governor and you got the guy who runs the mill, and they don't like each other, and there's politics happening there. We got a faction here and a faction there in town, one who wants to see more trees cut, and one who is like trying to preserve the nature, natural. That's town. But also for me, it gets into like kingdoms and continents, and emperor who's trying to begin to rule the world and wants to not only rule the world but become a god, because that's kind of higher than the politics of everyone else. Yeah.
Right.
I know godhood is not politics, but the idea of the way different kingdoms interact with one another. Obviously, I always talk about my Dormant Mind campaign in here, and that had 7 old kingdoms with 7 old gods, but those 7 old kingdoms all had different kinds of politics in the way they ran their place, but also the way they interacted with other places. So the Lokepa up in the icy north, and Strugafjorga, who was the ruler of that, and the way she interacted with the giants who were in the land kind of closest to her, or Telashiri, the water world of thieves and sneaky people. That's kind of that whole world. Or you get down to the Strand, which was the desert, and the people who live there are very dune-like, in some aspects, and they have to conserve, and the places are going to look different, but they have to have a politics of trade with other places in the world. And you guys saw that in my campaign, as there were the place that you guys, the small place that you had, was basically trying to get something to this to the guy who ran your country, because he then would not have to pay taxes to the emperor, which was over all the 7 kingdoms. If he could get this thing to the emperor that the emperor wanted, he was given this deal. And so there was politics happening in that. Politics almost always happen in mine in various levels. So that's me. And you as a GM may be like, oh, I hate all that stuff and I'm not going to have it in there. That's fine. When it comes to trade, for me, trade is one of those things that it's as you come into focus. I think before I talked about the idea of the video game only renders the what you're looking at. It doesn't render everything, but it's all back there, and it feels like everything is all the time rendered. That's the way trade is for me. If there is an encounter where people need to be carting, bread to this place, and there's it's going to be ambushed, and they need somebody to guard them, that trade idea comes into focus as my characters are doing that. But it's not something that I think a lot about unless, it becomes part of that world politics for me. The elves in the far off grassland, they have no way to get this thing. And so there's always been this long standing relationship between them and these other people. That's kind of a political thing, but it's also a trade thing. So, I mean, that can take place in there in my mind. But most often trade is talked about when that comes into focus for an encounter I'm running. Some leg of the encounter happens to veer into the idea that there's trade that happens. And this happens whenever there's like a ship going somewhere, that's often involving trade. Whenever there's a caravan going somewhere, that's often involving trade. It can have to do with when I meet like a tribe in the middle of nowhere, the impetus for whatever happens could be trade. Okay. But it's like I said, as I focus on it. The third one, economy, for me, mostly that has to do with the what's available. And this kind of dips into the thing we talked about last week, magic items, right? There's an economy that has, magic items everywhere. There's an economy that has like less magic items in the world unless you find them. There's but it's not just relegated to magic items. It can be the economy of metal in the world is sparse, and so you see a lot less swords everywhere and spears, and people are making things out of natural bone that they found, and so the economy is different. And so for me, that's kind of like a background issue, but it's like not. It's kind of here's the set, here's a general rule for this world. boom, and I lay it on like a template. And then in that, there's
Yeah,
politics that
yeah, yeah.
happen, and I'll
Right.
focus on trade when it gets to it. So that's kind of the level I think of those in. But that doesn't mean that's the way. It could
Absolutely.
be
Yeah.
very much that somebody else is like, man, trade is the thing that makes everything happen in my world. And I think
Mhm.
all about trade, and I just don't, there's not a lot of politics that goes on.
Yeah.
Or, maybe mine's all about economy. It's going to be some level of those three things. But for me, it almost always, the highest order of thought goes into the politics,
Yeah.
with the economy as a template, and trade
Yeah.
only as I focus on my characters and they happen to veer into a situation of trade. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the overall. And hopefully I didn't go too deep into some of your other thoughts and
No,
questions
that's good.
about this,
Yeah.
but that's kind of the way I look at these three things as I begin building my worlds. Typically, again,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel free to change that, but
Yeah. Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think both of us are in that place where like there's definitely other ways to do that than the way we sit in that. Yeah. I like those ideas of just like thinking in terms of how those play a role that you explain there. I was trying to think about politics. Because I think often for me that is the most upfront thing. If it's going to draw like the players in, that's a more active piece where it's like war. And I do want to attribute. I was having a side conversation with Evan Bright, who came and talked about Lancer a while ago, and sometimes in the chat. But we were having a side conversation this week about just this idea of economy, trade, and politics. And he was like, "Hey, don't forget, like war is a part of politics, kind of thing." And going to talk about Fiendish Aura here, what's being said there in a second too, referencing war. But that I think that often comes up. Like I realized there are definitely tropes in my games. The more we talk about them, I'm like, oh man, like I like to do these specific things in different ways a lot. and
Mm.
and maybe I need to like consider that next time we do something. But war I feel like tends to happen in the bigger games that I've played or ran. And it's not necessarily like always you are in this war, though that has happened. But I like the threat of it being like an environment that the game is being played in, and that definitely has to play pieces of like the politics situation of kingdom against kingdom, or people trying to overthrow other people, or like whatever that looks like.
Mhm.
That definitely comes like I think a lot more stark contrast than maybe the trade economy. For trade, I think this is probably the kind of what you were saying too, Matthew. Like I tend to think in terms not so much of like personally again what's being traded, more so as like those trade routes and how that affects like the players when they get on a boat to go across the ocean. How is that going to work? Like, and do I want them to be able to go directly to this other port city, or are there stops that are going to create like opportunities for them to have adventures, on another island, or they get swept over here, kind of thing. Like, how does that look? And I think that's when I'm thinking about it more often is about like, okay, I'm looking at my map, like what's the trade routes and things, not necessarily because I just want to dig into that, but more so like how is this going to affect the PCs as they travel from here to there kind of deal. So that plays a role. But when I start thinking about like these world building questions with this, I just like to start asking a lot of questions, and asking like what would these people be living off of, what would they um what would they need to be trading away in order to get the things they need, like how would they go about doing that trading, how are they connected to the peoples around them, like the game we're in now. You have this kind of expanded kingdom happening, but there are other groups. There's an elven culture that's north of the place. There are nomadic peoples that are in the prairie lands, or the plains kind of that are to the east of there, and there's all this stuff, and it's like, well, how are they actually interacting? They're not just all in a bunch of vacuums. So I do like to know that, but I think I tend to like almost flip it where it's like when I need to know that, that's when I'm like really thinking about it. It's not so much in the initial beginning of the game, if that makes sense. Like I'm typically not sitting there tracking all that stuff down, but it's like you said, as you zoom in, okay, the PCs are going into the prairie lands. I probably should know how these people feel about the kingdom that they're coming from, so that like those motivations can play out. So I think I tend to give, again, like kind of using my two things, either background or how does it advance the story. I tend to give the how does it advance the story a little more weight with all three of these, but the second piece kind of flows out of that, of it gets generated as I need it to do that. So again, that's just kind of how I function.
I like that idea of how does trade happen, and how does that, how do they feel about the kingdom? And I like that in both ways. I think about something like, if you've watched Games of Thrones, the wildlings to the north blocked completely off to be in this land that doesn't have all of the comforts of the south, but they have to somehow find a way to feed themselves and to, warm themselves, because they have been cut off. And so Fiendish Aura wrote in here that he has a game right now that's dealing heavily in trade and economics, due to the fact that the main continent's separated from the rest of the world. And so you can't fight just people. That's not how the war happens. It happens by limiting what they can get from the rest of the world, those resources. And so that's kind of a cool idea of a way to start a game and a way to run a game. And then to think about like the differences in the way someone who's cut off might be. So in this case, if it's the main continents that's being cut off, that's probably going to entail war. But like if it's something in like Game of Thrones, where it's these people who aren't as maybe well fitted with machines of war, they're good at fighting, but like theirs is, they're trapped. And so this hatred builds up, and at some point that's going to boil over and break through. And what does that mean? And so I do think that can be a really cool beginning or reason for why everything is happening. And so, economies, trade, politics, all kind of connected, but different parts of this same thing.
Yeah. When it comes to like economy, I'm thinking like, so I typically, it's going to be it has typically been a pretty generic fantasy economy, using my quotes again, like the barter trade, like those kind of things. There is coinage being, things are being bought and sold, but also a lot of just barter. That's the right word, right?
Barters, when you trade instead of use money. Yep.
That kind of stuff, and fishing, farming, industry doesn't like, I guess, the magic item industry, but I think about like stuff. I don't feel like I typically go too industrialized with my fantasy games, unless that's like kind of where we're going. But I like to make a unique thing happen, if I can, with like cities you go into, and that's not always like within economy and trade. Probably a lot of times it is political, but I was thinking, when I was thinking about this week, about the Matthew's you're in this, but the village you guys came across in a couple games ago. I knew it was a fishing village. The party had come up out of the ocean. They had kind of anchored and come on shore because they were needing to cut cross country to get to the place.
It's come out of the ocean. We were on a boat.
They were on a boat. Yeah. So they came disembarked from their ship, but popped into this village, and like we ended the session. And it was like, there is a fishing village over there that you saw, but we kind of ended the session there, not really knowing. So things happened, and then people decided in the next session to go into the village briefly to get like a cart and a horse and some things. But in that downtime for me, I was thinking about like, what makes this place unique? I don't want it to just be generic fishing village C, that they have now entered into. And I don't know why. I don't know if I was having some honey that week or what, but just decided honey is the thing that is going to set this place apart for whatever reason.
A fishing village with
Probably
lots of
doesn't
bees.
even work scientifically or whatever. I don't know, but like this place is going to have a ton of beehives. They're going to have honey. They're going to have mead. They're going to have honey cakes. It's going to be crazy. And
So they also should have probably had like lots of flowers and stuff, because they probably
yeah.
had lots of flowers that the bees
I think
used.
I mentioned flowers at one point. So
Yeah.
but if I didn't, then that was a misstep. But the yeah, so you all, when you went in, when the people went in, it was like you're passing through, all these beehives, or like Bjorn's bee pastures in The Hobbit, kind of thing. But and then coming in and being like, I just remember laughing super hard because I think like as players, you guys are like, what the heck is it with this honey? but that
Can
was,
I get this? And they're like, well, you can get some honey.
the honeyed, yeah. It's very sticky. But and that was like, there was kind of a laugh there for me, but also like that was a thing I think uniquely about like, okay, what is it that makes this different? And do you have to do that every time? No, but I do think that's an interesting way to play with economy and trade of like, a canon event in my game now is that village is the like hub of all honey in the region,
Like
and
all
that's where
honey in the
it gets sent
world.
out there. Yeah.
Forget
and,
region. Hub of the world.
and it just came from asking, like what makes this place unique, and trying to go with that. So that was a fun part. And I think you can do that to kind of just, again, develop the places that your PCs are going.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And that makes it's like you said, it didn't start that way, but now this place has a reason for existence and can be tied into other things through that economy stuff. So
yeah, for sure. Got any other thoughts on it?
Like I said, I don't tend to focus a ton on economies and trade, but after some of the ideas that we were talking about here today, I probably would like to have a campaign where that's the basis of things. Mine have mostly been politics, and even that is light compared to. Again, most of mine have to do with prophecy and have to do with like supernatural and divine sorts of meanings.
Yeah.
The things that matter more in the world to me than governments. But governments always play their parts in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Something I just want to make note of, this is moving away from the fantasy realm, but if we look at the game Red Markets,
Right.
that game, I think we can learn a lot no matter what genre of, I think we can learn a lot from that game no matter what you're playing, basically. But the whole subtitle of that is a game of economic horror, and this being like, it's zombie apocalypse, but really the zombies aren't the problem. It's like scarcity is the problem in this game. And when you play a full campaign out, or, a full game, that's what you're fighting against the most, is like, I have this much money and I can either buy bullets or bread, and like, what am I going to do?
And in all of that, I'm trying to save up because I'm trying to get the people I care about over the wall to the safe area of the world.
So, I mean, it's really great. And I feel
going to talk about that.
We're going to talk. I can't remember when, but it's going to come up soon.
It's coming. When it comes, you guys will all be so excited. You'll be like, finally, this game they mention all the time.
Yeah. But one of the things, people live in enclaves, and you deal with other enclaves, and you deal with clients from other places. And one of the things that's like part of the building of the world and the people and everything is totally like what kind of economy is this, is like a question. And he's got a really good, I mean, it's all tabled out and everything of, you could roll, that's one of those, you could roll on a table and just say, okay, this is what this is, and now I'm going to role play that out. Or you could think about it a little more deeply and figure it. But that, I think it's, interesting. It makes it more diverse. And just even knowing that kind of builds for me into the whole motivation thing of, I'm like, I'm blanking on the types right now, but even like how somebody would be interested in something that maybe the players, you go back to the fantasy game, it's like we come into town and are trying to like persuade somebody to do something. Well, someone who is in a like an economy of like everything's kind of shared across the board, and we do this, or like this where it's like cutthroat bartering, or oh, here we're a little more free with these things. I think that's going to play into the motivations, and motivations are so important with being able to play NPCs out effectively and like what they're actually doing, kind of thing. So that could play a really cool role. And I just can't recommend that game, people checking that game out enough. So just wanted to make note of that too.
And we will
Yeah.
get to our session on red markets.
Yep.
So if you're a zombie lover or an economic lover or a horror lover, we got just the thing for you coming sometime.
Yeah, we'd love to hear questions. Come in either on socials or through the Haversack. If there's like specific things or maybe thoughts that you all have, send them in, because we obviously can learn some things and implement those things too. So it'd be cool.
Yeah, and we want to talk about the things that you guys are struggling and fighting with as GMs yourself, or things that you have struggled with and fought with, and come to conclusions that you can help others on this podcast understand. So, all right. Well, that's what we have for, I think, politics, trade, and economy. Did you have anything else before we move on to our NPC of the day?
I don't think so right now.
All right. Well, we have an NPC that we pull from this book called Masks, 1,000 different NPCs, all kind of tabulated for you to find and use in your game. This one is Yana Rasad. And Yana Rasad is an attractive and petite young woman with shoulder-length black hair and a high forehead. She speaks in a high-pitched voice. Her clothes are bespoke, but not fancy. So that gives you kind of an idea of what she looks like. She is someone who feigns paying attention to people while kind of picking up their possessions, the things they have, to see which ones they care about most, because she's going to target those things in a prank. And you're going to find out that she is a prankster, right? Who is bored with the place that she is in life. She's impish. She loves to play jokes on people just to watch them get mad. She can't hide her laughter, though, when these pranks happen. So she's always caught, reveals that she's the cause of the prank. And she's never seriously trying to cause trouble to anybody. Just after they become upset, she'll undo what she's done, kind of fix what she's done. The motivation is that she's just bored, and she detests that her father has put her to work, because she is, her pranks are her way of entertaining herself while she fulfills her father's wishes. And what's her father's wishes? Well, she is a teenage daughter of a head merchant of a guild. And so they have money, but she grew up expecting to live this privileged life. And instead, her father insisted that she get a menial job so that she would learn to appreciate her wealth. And so she's stuck probably as a barmaid or something like that. And now she toils at a job that she hates. And so she pulls pranks, knowing that her father's money or influence will get her out of trouble. So she is free to prank everybody who comes in and give them a hard time. And she may say something like, "Oh, so your L's been salted. I don't know how that might have happened. If I hadn't had to, worry about these pinches and slaps that you've been giving me all night, I might have been able to pay better attention to your drinks." But then, she'll get him a new drink. So that's Yana. And the good thing about her is she's easy to put into a campaign and easy to be someone that can easily talk with your party, because she's always kind of coming up to people and like picking up things and talking with them. And she would probably prank your party. She would find the things that your party would like kind of jump, "Hey, don't touch that." And there would be the object of a prank coming up. And then you might think she's doing something with much more ill intent. And it just turns out that she's going to prank you. So what can be fun about her is, one, coming up with pranks to pull on people in the party, and two, figuring out how to maybe use her to give information, to feed information to your party, to let it be a very easy way for them to kind of become acclimated with others in the town, because she's going to pull a prank, but she's not real serious about it. She'll set it straight, and then your party will begin this conversation. And there you can go on into whatever this NPC could be used for. So if you have your party coming into a tavern, which who doesn't in a fantasy game, right? Even in sci-fi games, you look at Star Wars, they go into this tavern where the goofy people are playing the instruments and Han Solo has an encounter, right? So anywhere where you need to have that kind of NPC, this could be the person for you, Yana Rasad. And I don't have a whole lot more to add except for that she's very easy to use in a campaign. This kind of character, not too serious. There's no big diabolical thing behind this person that your characters feel like they're going to have to straighten out. You know, like with so many of our ones that are evil, it almost becomes like an encounter in the making. This one's not. This is just a person you can use, and you're like, oh, what can they be like? You know, because there could be 100 different ways somebody could be a tavern maid. Well, here's one.
Yeah,
her father is rich. She has money, but he won't let her like just have it without working this stupid job. And she's bored, and she probably knows a lot about the gossip going on in the world.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking today, I don't have to do this every time, but I should take one of these arcane artifacts and curious curios and throw them in. You know, I told you I had this book of items that I ordered just to see what it was about. And the first one that landed today when I looked at this was the, where was that here? Earrings of Hearing. Simple set of diamond stud earrings that greatly improves the wearer's hearing, giving them the ability to eavesdrop on conversations that are hundreds of feet away. These earrings also can protect the user from dangerously loud sounds. The background, the history of these earrings were worn first by someone named Isabel Stote, who was just a minor noble known for her love of gossip. And maybe that's how they end up in this barkeep's ears, right? One day while she was roaming the castle, she overheard a plot to assassinate the king, and she immediately fled to the throne room where she repeated the threats she'd heard word for word, and the king arrested the traitors, and Isabel was given a duchy for her services, and she still runs that duchy, but these earrings that she had at the time have gone missing. And so they could end up here on this girl. She's now pulling pranks, and part of that is she can hear what people are talking about and therefore set up her pranks even more. And maybe these earrings even find their way into the party's hands after she's accused of doing something and she tries to make it right. And they're like, hey, you can't be doing that. And she's like, I tell you what, I've got these earrings. They let you hear things. Yeah, I don't know if she would give those up meaningfully or not, but that's just another item. I'm occasionally sprinkle these in.
Yeah, that's cool.
The earrings of hearing. There's you an item for today on an NPC for today. You have any thoughts about either one of those?
Yeah. Say the name of that book one more time in case people didn't hear that last time.
Oh, I got it. Arcane Artifacts and Curious Curios, 1,000 Magical Artifacts for Game Masters. I said that so fast, you're probably going to have to rewind it.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
Arcane Artifacts and Curious Curios. It's by, I'm going to have to go to the cover of the book here.
Is that a Madeline?
Madeline Hale.
Yeah, Madeline Hale. Yeah. I looked into that a little more. It looks really cool. With Yana, I love the... bringing her in is like the initial connection being her pulling pranks on the PCs. And I do, even rolling back a little bit, like I love just the flavor of her and like that idea. It's kind of the same thing I was talking about with the honey village of like when somebody engages, even if, if you're kind of coming off the hip with an NPC of like, okay, they walked into this place I wasn't really prepared for. Maybe you have that list of names like Matthew talked about a while ago, sitting here and it's like, okay, I'm gonna use, Yana here, and asking like a quick question in your brain, like what makes them unique, and it may be they always tug on their ear when they talk to you, or it may be they walk with a limp, or maybe it's they like to play pranks on you, kind of thing. Like any of those kind of things. I think just asking that question really quickly and giving them a unique attribute that makes them known. Like this is that person. It's not same old person that we always see. So I think that's a good, just again, general thought process to ask like, okay, what's unique about this person and how can that kind of help them stick? But I like the demeanor. I like it's not like ill intent. It's just, she's bored, and it's not one of those things that's going to it shouldn't cause like massive hostilities between the party, but gives them a chance to role play too. Cause, one person may be like all for it. They're the jokester in the party and they love this. Maybe it's the like stiffen up type person cannot handle it, and they're at odds, because of that or whatever. And I think you get to see the party kind of play some things out, and that's really fun. She does make multiple encounters for me. I can't get away from it. It's just how it works. And it doesn't have to by any means. Like, I think she could just be, you're passing through town, she's there, you have some fun and realize how she is and go on your way. But I like the idea of like they've encountered her and she's played pranks, and they've kind of have this like, there's a playful wariness also, with her knowing the way she is. And then maybe the next time they come through town, she's, being cornered in the alley for having done something that she pushed the line a little too far, and they have to interject themselves into that situation to help her. And maybe that's when she's like, hey, thanks. Hey, I got these earrings. Maybe maybe you could make use of that.
Or she keeps the earrings, but she is like a source of information. Like
Right.
they always come to this place, and every time she pranks them. And so like they're sitting there and they're like, they know how she is and they're watching very carefully. But then the next time the wizard opens his scroll tube, starts to pull out his scroll, all that comes out is mustard and honey. He's like, dang it. Because he knows, and then they go back and she's like, oh, no big deal. It's here. It's safe. It's sound. It's your little scroll of whatever. And they take it and, whatever. Yeah. But every time they come through town, she has good information because she has these earrings and she hears things and she can hear things far away. But then every single time she plays a prank on somebody.
Yeah.
It can be whoever you're like, you just feel like needs a little ribbon in your party.
Yeah.
Somebody who maybe thinks they're remarkable and all of a sudden their sword's gone,
Maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah, I do like people who don't take themselves seriously in getting the games, like NPCs that are just like goofy in that way. And that's, I had the guy, well, the skeleton diplomat for the undead guy the other day. It was in this game, and his whole thing was like bone and death jokes, and I had a really good time, though everyone
had bad puns all the time.
So I like that kind of thing. But I was even thinking like, okay, maybe there's that, like they step in and do that, and maybe she connects in some different ways, and now she's their source of information, or she's a continual kind of fun thorn in their side. But maybe, her father is like the head of the Merchants Guild. So maybe that opens up even more, where he's like, saw you took care of my daughter the other day, and I was wondering if maybe you could step into this place, kind of thing. Like it can open up even more options of connection and adventures and jobs and things like that. So I like her on her own, like you said. I just really like that. But I do think all of these, you can always expand it out. And
fun recurring characters. What's fun is when you find an NPC that becomes a recurring character. And those kind of happen naturally. That's how Roller was. He was never supposed to be more than just a single, but the party reacted so well to his snideness that he became a regular and a lasting part of that game. And so you're always looking for those NPCs that become memorable and become repeatable. So
some of the most fun, I think, as a player in those kind of realms, like social interactions, has been, we're back in this town. That guy, the potion maker, we always go, and you get to go see them, or making up reasons to go talk to the librarian again or whatever. That's always like a really fun aspect of that. So that's cool. I like Yana.
There's our NPC, and she's a good one. Use her. Let's jump into our Haversack questions. We have a few. We're not going to get through all of them again, even though we're doing great on time today. We do have an in-person game night, and we have to be sure we're ready for that later tonight ourselves. But we are going to hit some of these Haversack questions. We have some backlogged, and some more will get backlogged. But don't worry, the Haversack has no hole in it. It will hold as many questions as we have. And when we reach in, just the one we need will come out. We're going to reach in now. What's the one that comes out?
Shoop. So we have a lot, and that is awesome. Thank you. We'll see how far we get today. So this is Wataya Hotel. There's a few questions. I think 2 from this email. This is Haversack questions, Color Out of Space edition. Dear Matthew and Adam, Have you ever thought of implementing any sort of old or forgotten gods into your cosmology? I know the whole Cthulhu idea is a little overplayed, but I still think the general concept could be fun. So we'll maybe start with that one here.
Well, Wataya, that's pretty much all I do. Some people use the Raven Queen and Paylor, and those are great, and I like them. But in my campaigns, the gods are almost always a unique god that was an old and forgotten god that now is come to light again. And because in the campaign I'm in now, all 7 of the gods were the forgotten gods. That's what they were called, because they were it is kind of like in Game of Thrones. And this really, I don't know if this played into my thinking. It probably had to have, because I read those books long before the shows even came out. But the idea that there were these old gods that like some people still worship, but the emperor has basically said, hey, here's the new gods, and this is who we, and the priests and all of these religious organizations are trying to push these new gods, but really there's a contingent, and the old gods are the powerful gods. And that's what happened in this. There's 7 old gods that have kind of been forgotten, that have kind of been pushed to the people in the faraway spaces are the only ones who still worship these gods. But we're finding that they are in fact alive and powerful, and a lot is happening now because of that. So that's kind of my go-to, is the old and forgotten gods. And the gods I come up with are gods that you're not going to find in a book. Well, you're not going to find as a god in a book. I read I read, there's a book, it's a wonderful book that has a very different feel to it than a lot of fantasy genres. It's called The Tree of Swords and Jewels by C.H. Cherry, and it has in it, there's a high elf named Arafel who deals with the god of death and stuff, but she became one of the gods in my 7 forgotten gods. I love that name, and I loved some of how she acted in that. It's different in my game, but I lifted that kind of name and some of her the way she acts. So Arafel is one of the gods in mine, but there are, every one of them are gods that have not been encountered in a book before. But that doesn't mean that you can't make like amazing games with Night Queen and with Paylor and with, gods that are part of, the Cthulhu and stuff like that. So, Adam, what about you?
Yeah. And again, I know we are all made different in this way, but like I think for me, though, like as a player in that game, I do have more interest as a player. I think I'm drawn more to like wanting to know more about those, the Reaper, the Righteous, the Silent, the Sage, like those, than maybe other deities that have been presented, which I don't feel like there's been like a ton, but once we got kind of into that, that's like what we focused on. As a player, I feel like that draws me more in, and maybe that's just like the timing of the experience. We've been doing this for a while. We've seen Obed High a lot. We've seen, like all these kind of people, and
but I can remember, sorry not to cut you off here, but
No,
I can remember when we were first starting to play, getting that the book, or going to the part of the player's manual where it talked about deities and whatever, being like, oh, here's one that loves nature, and here's one that, is all about, animals or forest, or here's, the Raven Queen's the one I remember, who's all about like death in its proper time, and like abhors things that are undead. Oh man, I really resonate with this one. That's who my guy's going to follow. And then that helps me build out my character. Like when I was first starting, that was hugely interesting to me to like pick like which deity I thought my character would like really base their life on, and then that makes a lot of choices in the way I play things and stuff. So that's cool too.
Yeah, that definitely is. Yeah, and I don't want to downplay those. And I think once you like kind of jump in as a character, that's a thing where it's like, okay, I'm going to go after this and I want to be curious as a character, regardless of like whether I'm like, oh, I've read all the content on Paylor. It's like, but my character hasn't. Necessarily. Maybe they have, maybe they're a cleric and they have, but I think like, I don't know, as a player, I just wanted to like mention that I think it's interesting to bring in some mystery, even like in real life mystery of like, I have no idea what's going on in Matthew's brain as far as like who the Reaper is.
Who does?
Some of the other ones maybe I do, um, but yeah, for me, for the most part, no. I think like we talked about the kind of gods and magic and things, and I typically have, again, I grab from here and there, and I'm not super strict about my canon, but um, I've typically used like, this is D&D or Pathfinder kind of people, maybe bringing in some mythology to things. But I guess in this game now, maybe I don't know if this would count to what Watai is asking, but the like Titan idea, it that definitely is somewhat pulled from the like Greek and Roman kind of idea of like, Titans, and then the new gods came in and kind of, again, I'm being very general, but they displaced them, kind of deal. And that definitely is kind of playing a role in that, of this idea of like, those were the old powers in the world. But for my game, what that meant is they kind of all have a theme, or I can't think of the right word for it. Like, chaos is the one that the party has most kind of been wanting not to get freed. We don't want chaos to get out into the world. Dominion and is somewhere bound. Terror got out 25 years before and somehow got killed, by mortals. Like that, it's that kind of idea. And I've liked that a lot, to play with that, of just like those kind of ideas being personified in a creature, basically an old god in a lot of ways. But they're really mysterious. And I think the mystery has been fun, at least from the GM side of thing. I don't know, still yet to be determined, I guess, in some ways, like what that looks like for the party. But that's kind of how it's played out for me. Yeah. Wataya goes on to ask, similarly, have you ever thought of implementing the Koatoa? If you aren't familiar, they are a race of little piranha-like fish people, but what makes them notable is that if enough of them believe in a certain god or things that they worship, their subconscious will physically manifest it, and it will become real. I haven't heard of a lot of people utilizing this, but I think it could be really interesting if done right. Thanks for everything. Until next time, sincerely, Wataya Hotel 98. I have never heard of that, and I think that's crazy and cool. That's what I have to say.
Also never heard of it. But if I was thinking of using them in a campaign, it would very much be that someone of evil intent has begun this thing where they've gotten all the Kuatoa to believe in something that would benefit them, and it has become real, and now we have to like conquer it. Or it would be a thing where they happen to have, it sounds like they believe in it and then it becomes. And so who controls what they believe? That would be the crux of what's going on in a game if I would use them. So whether that's someone using them for ill intent and has created this god that now is, because enough of them believe in it, that it is wreaking havoc. And so we've got to stop it, or,
Yeah, I like that idea a lot, of like who is kind of pulling the strings there. I also feel like I've just like missed it completely with this.
Yeah.
Like so many missed opportunities. I feel like I've used the Koatoa for like trash creatures so many times. It's like, oh, there's a fight in the water, piranha guys, sure, they just get destroyed, and it's like, there's so many better ways. And coming off of you all just coming up out of the ocean on your ship, that could have been a really interesting piece of that too, because there's so much in my game about things coming into the world that should not, and stopping that, like that would have been a really good theme with that too. So, man, missed opportunity.
Yeah, we were just in this place where there is a relic that is being guarded at the bottom of a water pick or something like that. And man, these Kuatoa could have had something that would make great influence around that.
I guess the game's not over yet. So
The game is not over yet. We know what to expect now.
Yep. Well, thank you, Wataya. So moving on, got a question from Josh Morton. Have you ever run an evil campaign? The PCs are the bad guys working on taking over the world.
It's going to be easy, isn't it?
For me, it
What's
is.
the answer?
No.
Nope. Same here. Never have. I have a hard time. So we have a couple characters in Adam's campaign that he's running right now that claim to be evil characters. Now, they don't always act like it, but sometimes they do. I find it very hard to even play a party of evil people because evil cares only for itself. Evil is like all self-centered. And so at some point it's hard to have like party goals or have party commitment, have doing something for greater good. Well, it wouldn't be good. It'd be for greater evil. But even that, there's like an ambition of I'm trying to be the one to get evil's attention. So it lifts me high. You know, it's just hard to do. I've heard of people running evil campaigns. I've never been involved in one, and I just have a hard time seeing how it would work well. Plus, it's not at the heart of who I am. I'm all about the fantasy of like striving for selfless and better for others, good, you know, not striving for myself. So I've never done that.
Yeah. Like heroics versus like, heroics, I think, is my kind of thing where I have not done that probably
and
I
those
want that
heroics
to be,
would have become like the anti-hero sort of things, like somebody who's just like the best at what they do. That's would be called the heroic, but it's all for self-centered stuff.
I've heard people doing that before, and there's probably, I'm sure there's people out there that feel like that's been like a successful game, kind of thing. But I have a hard time moving that direction. And I just like the complexity of like, maybe you have somebody who really struggles with a lot of things, and maybe he does struggle with self-centeredness or like the temptation into that. But it's more interesting to me to like, for that to be a fought thing rather than a just like, in the same way, I think I'm not super drawn to extremely lawful good paladin party who goes around being chivalrous and shaking hands and kissing babies, kind of like that. That's not like that's not super interesting to me.
A bunch of politicians, a party of politicians.
Yeah, I don't know, like that typically doesn't, and I don't know, that's me, like Matthew said, that's kind of just like how I'm bent, I guess, but I don't lean into that too much.
Says he has a party that tried to be evil, but they end up taking over the mob and getting workers' rights for them, and then starting unions across the world. The rest of the story, increasing workers' rights, which is not evil.
That is
it's like
amazing.
They're doing stuff for other people's good. So
I love that. Oh man, I love that. That's awesome.
It's tough to. I'm sure somebody out there has an amazing game story where it was an evil party, but I've heard more failed campaigns because of evil parties than I've heard like successful stories told. I've heard more of those that have just dissolved because everybody's all for themselves. So if any of you have had like a really good evil campaign that was satisfyingly a story satisfying in the end, the way it was told, let us know.
I do like this doesn't fit into that. I don't think it's different, but the like people who should not be the heroes end up being the heroes. Like, I think that's a pretty fun story of like, I don't know, these monstrous people are the ones that end up saving the day, or you expect them to be evil, but they end up being good, kind of thing, which maybe that's kind of how this turned out. But up above, just going back to the Koatoa really quick, Rob said that we fought those in his campaign way back in the day, and I'm like, I don't remember. We're gonna have to sit down and talk about that sometime, because
remind us about that.
I want to know. I was like, what? So Josh asked that. We got a little bit of time, maybe a couple more minutes here to ask some more questions. The next one, actually, Rob, who was in the chat. Haversack question here. Rob says, greetings, GMs. Here's a few questions for you that I think are important for new GMs to consider. The first one being, when you have players with wildly differing playstyles or game expectations, what are some ways you found to encourage party cohesion and meet everyone's type of fun? We'll start with that one.
Yeah, I think probably most of my campaigns have had players with different kinds of fun, and it really does. As a GM, for me, it just takes recognizing and keeping at the front of my mind what are the different types, because some of the, if it's something like person loves like minis and dice and like the little things, the touchy parts of the game, well, that's easy. Just have lots of touchy parts in the game. But that's not necessarily going to do it for someone who is all about narrative and story. And so I need to make sure that they get a chance not only to experience the narrative that I'm putting together, but to tell stories. And so if I'm aware of that being a way for them, especially for them, I can say, hey, do a little write up and post it about what your character went through as they were making this decision, or write a little story about your interaction with the head of the Thieves Guild, and then post that, and then I can bring that into the game, but giving them that part of creation, and whatever that is for each of the different 8 types of funds. I'm not thinking of all of them off the top of my head here, but discovery. Adam's one who always is about discovery. And so when Adam's in a campaign of mine, I know that I'm going to make opportunities for his character to discover lands, to discover how things work, to discover what it is about this god, to be the one who discovers. That's going to be part of what draws him along in the game. It's again finding out what is it that's fun for your players and putting that in front of them.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think like a huge part of that battle, in my opinion, is the knowing the differences.
That's the biggest part of the
yeah.
battle. And the second biggest part is when it's not at all your style as a GM.
Yes.
That's the second biggest part of that battle. It's like, okay, I know they like this. And then you get really into the thing you love doing, and you got to remember, no, wait, it's not just about my style of fun.
Yeah.
What's their style of fun?
Yeah. Not expecting like, oh, you're going to jump on this hook just because that's like, I think that's a really good point too. So going back and, love the session 0, especially if maybe it's like a new group of people or something. Like, I think after some time, like I remember having conversations where it's like, all right, what do you think this person's type of fun is? What do you, and cause we had played together enough that we kind of understood that. But particularly if it's new, or maybe you haven't played very long, having those conversations about like, what actually are you interested in? And in the same way that, we talked about, I think particularly with like the facilitator, where we're like sharing spotlight, and that spotlight's moving around to different party members just in a session. Thinking of it in terms of the types of fun also, like there's certain aspects of, we're telling a story. So there's going to be some story. If we're in person, we're rolling dice and moving miniatures, like, and to be able to, enlarge on those a little bit, I think is good. But like, I think that discovery idea you brought up, Matthew, is like a really good point of that. That one's not necessarily always super overt, but like if you have somebody who's really oriented that way, making sure that, regularly there's something to find out, one way or the other, whether that's a new corridor to walk down, or a book to translate, or a map piece to add to your collection, like whatever that kind of thing is. But I like that idea of like passing around, just being aware of people's things. And I think like in that session 0, having those conversations of, we as a group understand that, this person's really here because they want to hang out with people. And if we were playing poker, they would probably be just as happy, and that's cool.
And losing all their money, but they're hanging out with
somebody. or like this person really, really, really wants to, oh shoot, I lost the word again. when you get into the like you're into the jumping into the story, like disassociation is not the right word, but it's like kind of moving
Immersion,
that immersion.
uh,
Yeah, it's the more positive
suspension
kind
of
of.
disbelief.
Like I really want to be immersed in the story. Like that's really what I want to do, and for people, even the party, to have a good understanding of each other. I think that's part of that facilitator role too, of bringing cohesion in that way, and then being able to give each other room to play in that too. I think's good. So
So
that's my
what he
thought.
said about that session zero and finding out like what is fun for you. I think it's important for people to hear each other's type of
Yeah.
fun too,
Yep.
because the guy who's like, I just want to do everything like, probability and chance and statistics. That's like my thing. Well, that's not somebody else's thing, and he needs to hear that. But they need to hear that that is his thing, and so there's going to be sessions where there's a lot of probability and statistics and tables and rolls and talking about that stuff because that's his type of fun. And so this guy who's just like totally into story and could care less about that stuff needs to know that some nights are going to be this, and some nights we're going to be more this, and
Right.
every one of them say, hey guys, we're coming together as a party. We all have different types of fun.
Yeah.
But the way we're going to make cohesion happen, the way that we're going to like do this together is it's not always going to be 100% my way. It's not always going to be 100% his way or 100% your way. It's going to be a give and take of that stuff. So I think that expectation at the beginning goes a long way.
Right. Yeah.
And then you just got to keep it front of mind. What are their types of fun?
Yeah. Keeping those conversations happening is always important. So that's a really good question. It's a really good question. The second one, how do you address players who have difficulty separating character knowledge and player knowledge, aka metagaming?
So this one's always fun and it's difficult as a player. So for instance, I told you most of my players end up having this horribly low charisma because I want to pump my other stats. I don't think I'm alone in that. Charisma typically gets that little and everybody else, who wants dexterity and strength or intelligence, whatever. But what you have to do then, whoever is my, being the GM for my game, when I come up, because I am a naturally talkative and I talk off the seat of off the seat of my pants really well. I'll come up and just be like jumping into conversations. And so I'll come up with this great argument when we're against someone that should persuade anybody. And he'll have to say, and all that sounded really great to you, but as you stood there, you see his face like contorting, like, what is this crazy red-headed, horrible sounding low, charisma person trying to say to me? Now roll charisma. And so even though I said all this stuff that should persuade anybody, which is what I would normally do. And it would be easy for a GM to be like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And so we go on, well, my character shouldn't be able to do that. And so as great as I sound, maybe, then I have to roll that charisma dice, the charisma check, and it comes out so bad. And they're like, yeah, they look at you like, you thought you made the best argument ever, but it was really bad and nobody bought it. Same with intelligence. And this, I remember we had a player in a game who was supposed to be this high intelligence person, which he had, and he was supposed to be this inventor, create lots of things. The problem is he was not very inventive. Not saying in all of life, but for some reason he just had a hard time coming up with like inventive ideas at the table. And unfortunately, Adam's character, who wasn't supposed to be inventive at all, was always like, what if you took that beetle hide and made some armor out of it or something? And he's like, oh yeah, but like in those cases, what is harder is to say, okay, you're really inventive. Roll. Okay, you come up with a very inventive way to do this. Let's all like together brainstorm what might have been the inventive way he came up with.
Right. Yeah.
if he couldn't come up with it at the table, and then Adam could say, oh, well, what if you did this or what if you did that? It's like, well, that's exactly what you did with this roll that's so high because you're so inventive. You did, you picked the one that sounds best to you of all these different players at the table, their ideas they throw out of what you could have invented, and then you make that. So that's where recognizing. Now, the problem is in your mind as the GM, recognizing, okay, they come up with all these cool things, but their intelligence is really bad. And so even though they said they came up with all this stuff, I'm going to have to say, You didn't
Yeah.
really, because your intelligence is so bad. I'm going to be
Right.
like, you said some stuff and it really felt like a really good idea to you, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're like, but it is. It's a really good idea. We could do this. Be like, you may think it's a wonderful idea, but it's not.
Yeah.
And so then the problem is somebody else at the table who is supposed to be high intelligence might be like, okay, I take what they were talking about, but I show why that could actually work, and we actually do it. And you're like, oh, well, you do have a high intelligence role for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
you do find a way to make it work. And so maybe that can
Yeah.
like party wise work. But it's
Right.
hard when the player themselves keeps forgetting that, oh yeah, I dump statted my wisdom. And so I'm gonna, they keep wanting to make these wise choices, but instead they make these unwise choices, and you as the
Right.
GM, you've
Yeah.
got to remind them, like, I do this, and you're like, do you though? Let's see your wisdom roll. Oh no, as much as you know that that's a really good thing to do, you're just unwise in your decisions, and you do this instead,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it
Yeah.
can be hard for players to remember.
hmm
I'm
Yeah. I
sorry, I
think,
kept just talking
no,
over
you're
you
good.
there,
You're
Adam.
good. No, I was spurring things. Yeah, I like that as like, there's a certain point when it comes to the skill things, and like, this doesn't match up with your stats, mm, in relation to your actual natural abilities to do things, to talk or to think or whatever. Um, uh, that's like a creative moment for the GM, I think, because like, I was thinking about, you were talking about, okay, this person lays out this amazing plan, but then fails their role totally. It could be like, if you ever had somebody explain something to you in like jargon that you have no understanding, and it's like they have a really good understanding of what they're telling me. I don't understand because they just use 52 words that like mean nothing to me.
Mhm.
Like, it could be something like that, or it just sounds like wah 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 wah, kind of thing. And it's like this does not land for the person you're talking to. Or just I actually do like that idea of, you said the other party member with the good intelligence rephrases, and like, maybe they interpreted, and that could be a thing. Or just like being creative on our toes of like, why this doesn't work, even though, yes, that was amazing, but your character is not up to snuff with that. I think there's some
What
other
I
things. Oh, go
what
ahead.
I didn't address here in his question, as I'm sitting here, as I'm rereading it as you're
Yeah.
talking, what do you do to address people who have difficulty separating character knowledge from
Yeah, and that's
player knowledge?
that's where I'm headed
So,
to. Yeah.
you come across this thing and they're like, "Oh, guys, we got to burn it because that's the only way it's going to die." It's like, you would not know that.
Yeah, yeah.
So Adam, how do you
Yeah,
handle
right.
that when people are like obviously doing things because they've read all about
Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
in the
They have
monster manual,
they have
but
their
they
phone
should
open
not
looking at
know.
the monster as they're playing.
Right.
Yeah, well, maybe it's snarky, but immediately there's gotta be something different about that monster. Which, like you've talked about, Matthew, it's like
Yep.
pretty typically things are not as they are in the book for you. And I've like
Right.
picked up on that too, where it's like something has shifted. But if somebody's gonna straight up be like, oh yeah, they're fire resistant, and it's like, he didn't even roll like a knowledge monster kind of check here. Like,
It's like
may not
suddenly
be,
this one is ice resistant,
yeah, it's
and
like
fire
suddenly,
really hurts it, even
yeah.
though you would think not.
Yep, and it now can cast disintegrate too. But yeah, I do think like switching up, that does play a role, I think, for both of us, where it's like, if it's about monsters, typically that's going to be shifted anyway, because we're adding things or subtracting things or skinning something to look like something, but it's actually stats of something else. I think it happens a lot for both of us. When it comes to, trying to think, this happened recently, but I was like asked a question about like the world, but it was the player asking me the question, and I'm like, you don't know, and like, that was the thing, I just was unwilling to
Mhm.
tell them because their character doesn't know, and they hadn't discovered it yet, kind of deal. And I think you're well within your rights to, I mean, I don't think we need to be jerks, but like, if it's something they wouldn't know, we don't have to we don't have to share that either, even if it's just them trying to like get clarification on something. It's like, oh, not yet. Now is not that time. Or I do that even sometimes. And, I don't know if this is good or not, but if someone's trying to remember something, it's like, well, do you remember? did you take notes? Does your character actually remember this? Or like, I don't think I'm going to tell you the name of that person again because you've talked to them 4 times, kind of thing. And maybe your character just doesn't know who they are.
That's me.
I do that all the time,
remember.
So
that's when I turn around to my other PC, Josh, and I'm like, "Did you take notes on that? Because you were there, right?"
I'm trying to think of like other meta things, like some stuff I don't know that we can manage all the time. Like I'm just trying to think of possibilities. It's like after you play for a while, there are certain things that you understand about, like, okay, they're casting this spell and I kind of just know, and I'm going to try to play that. But I think that's a good player. And this is something I want to talk about eventually in this podcast, is like player etiquette too, of like, how do we teach, I don't want to just be, a jerk and shut everything down, but like, even how do we teach as we facilitate, like, hey, don't just suddenly switch to fire arrows as soon as you see the ice thing, because you may not actually know that, like, how do you kind of teach that and encourage that in people too?
Although there is a common knowledge that if something,
I guess that, I mean, that's not a good example.
Fire's a good one, but like something they wouldn't know.
Right. Yeah. That's not a good example, but I think that there is some, like,
unless their intelligence was really low, then don't be switching to those fire arrows.
And just like learning like how to not metagame, I think is a good skill too for all of us. So
yeah, and I think those gentle reminders. Would you know that with an intelligence of 8? And then they'd be like, "Oh, I have no idea."
Yep.
Sometimes they just need to be reminded. Oh yes, I chose to be very, very stupid. Chose that.
Final question from Rob in this email. One of the basic tenets of RPGs is that characters' abilities are represented by stats. What's the best way to encourage players to portray their character in a way that accurately reflects those stats, i.e. the low int character not immediately solving the difficult puzzle, or the low cha character expecting dazzling conversation skills? So that's kind of what you're talking into.
Yeah, I kind of jumped into that early, didn't I? But yeah, I think it does have to do with reminding them of their choices. They start like talking like so eloquently, and you're like, man, as good as that sounded in your own head, somehow everybody around you is looking at you like you're a duck with 3 legs. I don't know. Maybe it's your cha. Maybe it's your charisma so low. Then you look down at your paper and you're like, oh yeah, I do have a really low charisma. So that's how I would do it.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. And I think we kind of talked into that a little bit, but just sometimes just reminding them about who they are, and the way people react to them. I think about that even with like, there's certain
I mean, you should really even do it with strength and dexterity and constitution too.
Right.
You have that guy who like, he's like tiny and he has a strength of like so bad. And he's constantly like, I jump up and I push that boulder over and I do this. And you're like, well, you jump up and kind of bounce off of that huge boulder. Or, people like, I want to run and like picking my feet on those floating pieces of ice. I want to jump across this. And it's like, what's your dexterity?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Okay. Roll for that. That's a little easier. It's a little harder in those the ones of intelligence, wisdom, charisma, because mental those are, things that, I mean, you will have to say roll, but like, it's hard when they just like throw out an intelligent thing. And you're like, no, you wouldn't have thought of that.
For sure. Yeah. Reminding that. I think that's good to just like keep bringing that back at that point. There was something else that he said that portray their character.
I'm sorry, I jumped in and knocked you off your train of thought.
Only one today. So, but he
Only
says, looking
one
forward to
today.
your insights, Rob. So hopefully that was helpful to you, Rob.
Yeah.
Thank you all for
And I'm
your
sure
questions.
Rob has some great insights on that too, because he's been doing this longer than either of us.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So we have more in the Haversack, but for today, that's going to be it. So keep those coming and do that.
We enjoy your questions, and when we don't get to them right away, it doesn't mean that they're lost. We will. That is the last in our world building part of this series. And so now next time we are going to start looking at the idea of narrative structure of a campaign. Yeah. What does that look like? How do you build it as a GM? And how can you get better at it? So join us next time. We're going to be talking about that here on Rise of the GM. Thanks, guys. See you all next time.
Thank you all for joining us.